It's my great pleasure to introduce Ed Begley Jr.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. Thank you, Skylight Books, for getting such a great turnout, and Food and Water Watch, both of you together getting this great turnout. I go to a lot of these wonderful events, but this is good. It's good to see so many people that care about our food and water. I would hope many more people would care about it, and I think deep down they do. We just have to reach them. And there's a great organization that's helping reach out to people, and that is Food and Water Watch. Whether it's at Porter Ranch with the disaster there, informing people what's going on and how we can take steps to make a change, they've been instrumental with that. Whatever the challenge is with fracking, letting us know what's going on with fracking in different parts of LA and the state and the nation, they've been instrumental in getting the proper information and where the levers of power are, where we can affect a change and try to make a difference in policy and indeed in action. But I want to talk specifically not just about Food and Water Watch, but about one individual, wonderful Wenonah Hauter. Big hand, please. There's many reasons to like, love, and admire Wenonah Hauter, not the least of which is she is in fact a farmer. She has a working farm in Virginia, don't you? I'm a gentleman farmer in Studio City. You know, I've got my little urban farm, and nothing wrong with that, but she has a much larger and better working farm, and so she knows very well how to grow food and what's involved in the circle of life that we all depend on, that some people are derisive of and think problems can be solved with genetic engineering and substances that will do the job quickly but have long-term costs. And she's been great in talking about that. Her other book, Foodopoly, I hope other people have read Foodopoly. I have. A big hand for Foodopoly if you've read that. Get that. Do they have Foodopoly here too, by the way? Yes. Good, very good. Another wonderful book to get. But we're here today to talk about Frackopoly, about the challenges and indeed the incredible costs involved with fracking, hydraulic fracturing, and they've been doing a form of fracturing for a while, but now the way they do it with the kind of chemicals that they use and the amount of water that they use and the damage to the ecosystem and the damage to nearby communities, we're just creating wasteland throughout the country. In Dish, Texas, in Rifle, Colorado, places, Dimmock, Pennsylvania, places all over the country have first-hand information about how bad it is, and Josh Fox has done a wonderful documentary about it called Gasland and subsequent movies about it. But the work on the ground is being done by Food and Water Watch, and specifically by Wenonah Hauter, and she is a hero of mine. She has done an incredible job with this book. It's a terrific book, and it really lays things out in scientific terms and historical terms. You're going to hear a lot more about it, so I'm going to stop with all my chin music and get to the important part of this day, which is hearing from the incredible Wenonah Hauter. Wenonah.
Thanks so much for coming today. You know, we're all in this together, and there are literally thousands and thousands of grassroots activists across the country really working in their community and at the state level to do something about extreme energy. And I'm really pleased that I'll be joined by Sandy and Matt to talk about the local issues going on related to drilling and the Porter Ranch disaster. So if we want to know where we're going, we have to know where we've been, right? And that's kind of why I wrote Frackopoly. You know, since 2012, 80% of fracking has been for oil. But the oil and gas industry are depending on drilling and fracking for natural gas for their profits in the future. And gas, of course, is methane, and methane is a much more potent gas than carbon. In fact, almost 100 times more potent in the first 20 years after it's emitted. And that means that because we should be doing something about climate change in the next 10 to 15 years, that we need to get off of natural gas. And we need to be talking about it and demanding public policy changes. The second reason I wrote this book is because of all of the frontline communities across the country, like you have here in LA with the drilling, but across the country in 30 states, we see frontline communities being abused by the oil and gas industry. And Kim's had to take a loss on her house because once there's drilling next to where you live, drilling and fracking, nobody wants to live there. So she just took and left the house that she'd purchased to protect her daughter. And the third reason I wrote Frackopoly, and oh good, it shows up better there than it does here, is because in the mid-1990s, I worked on a renewable energy project called Powering the Midwest. And at that time, we said that renewables were ready, and they were. They were already very cost effective. But here we are, almost 30 years later, and this is the sad story. At the end of 2015, geothermal, solar, and wind are 5.5% of our electricity mix, 12% here in California. But this is shocking to me, and yet we hear that the solution to climate change is to make everything electric. So that's really why I want to talk about natural gas and where we're going in the future, because we can't use natural gas as a bridge fuel. And this is just another way of looking at it. But decisions were made, and I'm going to talk about the deregulation that's taken place. Decisions were made to get rid of coal and to let natural gas replace it. And you can see that for the first time in 2015, that coal is going down and gas is rising to meet it. And that is the plan unless we organize and put a stop to it. So I know some people, maybe a few of you aren't familiar with fracking, so I just thought I'm going to talk about fracking, but really Frackopoly, the first part of it, is a history of the oil and gas industry. And I know that there's drilling, conventional drilling going on here in LA. Our position is we should be keeping it all on the ground. Just to talk a little bit about what fracking is, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a science fiction-like process where large amounts of water, an array of toxic chemicals, and very fine sand are injected very deep underground under very high pressure to recover oil and gas. And a lot of different problems happen as a result of this. We really don't know what's going on a mile or two underground. And in a lot of places, the vertical well is drilled up to 2 miles, and then the horizontal tunnel goes another 2 miles. The fracking takes place under extremely high pressure in multiple stages. And that's the root of many of the problems. This is what a big fracking operation looks like in a place like North Dakota. This is fracking in West Texas, just to give you a sense of the number of wells. There have been 140 wells drilled and fracked since 2005. And the oil and gas industry and the U.S. government project that there will be 650 to 700,000 wells drilled in the coming decades. And it's going to be our job to stop this. One of the impacts is each well takes about 1,000 large truckloads of materials to get the well up and running. So there are a lot of impacts, lots of local impacts that we're not going to have time to go into. But in rural areas, it really industrializes these places, ruins the infrastructure, brings in a lot of young oil and gas rednecks, changes the culture in the community. And this is a fracking activist's home in Wyoming. This is not fog. This is the pollution that takes place from drilling and fracking. And in fact, in Wyoming, the air now rivals LA's on the worst days here in LA. I mean, pretty shocking. And the other big problem with the fracking industry is it takes a lot of water. So 50 times more than conventional drilling on average, and that's about 1.7 billion or million gallons rather per well on average. But some parts of the country need a lot more water to actually drill. So for instance, some parts of Texas, dry Texas, are using 13 million gallons per well. So that means that there is a lot of toxic wastewater, and the oil and gas industry has a lot of wastewater even for conventional drilling. And that wastewater is one of the problems. Of course, there's also the problem of aquifers being drilled into. We've seen that in places like Wyoming, the methane coming through people's faucets. The oil and gas industry takes a lot of shortcuts. They just consider it the cost of doing business. They consider worker deaths the cost of doing business, and it's a very dangerous industry to work in. But getting back to the wastewater, what to do with this wastewater is a major problem. So sometimes, this is Colorado, there are big evaporation ponds where the water is evaporated and then you're left with a lot of very toxic gunk that has to be hauled off and dealt with in some way. Another way that it's dealt with is through deep well injection. It's actually injected very, very deep into the earth. And the oil and gas industry has been doing this for a while, but now they're doing it very intensely because of the large amount of fracking wastewater and all of the drilling that's going on. So here's a road that's been destroyed in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is a good example of where this is being done. They used to have 1 to 3 magnitude earthquakes a year. Now they're having 5,000 or more. I mean, more than California. And this is happening in other states too, Arkansas, Ohio, parts of Kentucky, where this deep well injection is taking place. And then many of you, probably most of you, know that the drilling in Kern County and a similar technique is being used, although there may be some fracking going on there, but they frack with steam. Chevron has a lot of wastewater. The LA Times has written about it. And that wastewater is being used in some cases to irrigate crops. So here are some of the names of the crops, and I know that there's going to be a coalition effort this year to really put an end to that in the state of California. I mean, this is a really horrible, more of the brands. So there are a lot of other impacts with fracking. All of the pipelines, all of the liquefied natural gas plants, all of this infrastructure. And what's really shocking is that the financial services industry is deep into this. In fact, Goldman Sachs is now one of the largest owners of the actual commodity of natural gas, and they are making long-term contracts. We also have the financial services industry, the big out-of-control banks, making a lot of loans for fracking, for the oil and gas industry, and $200 billion in loans just for the infrastructure. Now, do you think that they believe that we're going to have a quick transition to renewables, or do you think they're funding this infrastructure for another 40 years? I mean, I think that is where the truth really lies. Another impact that isn't discussed a whole lot is for fracking, very fine white sand is used. And that means that a lot of sand has to be mined. And that kind of silica sand is found in Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, parts of Iowa. This is what a silica mine looks like, and there is a whole movement against silica mining as well. And in fact, the communities are really threatened because if you breathe the silica dust, you can get silicosis, a very dangerous lung disease. And then there are all of the horrible accidents like the oil bomb trains. So that's just a few of the impacts of fracking. I want to turn now to what the first part of Frackopoly is about, which is how the oil and gas industry actually got positioned this way. Why do they get to run the U.S. government? In fact, a lot of governments around the world. And I always like to point out, and this is the opoly part of the book, is that Thomas Jefferson, no matter what you think of him, he believed that freedom from monopoly should have been written in the Bill of Rights. And Alexander Hamilton, who was a supporter of the banks, thought that it wouldn't be a good idea, and there was a big fight about this. So over the history of our country, this has been an issue many, many times, the fight over monopoly power. And I can tell you Thomas Jefferson wasn't worried about consumer prices. He was worried about the political power that comes when a commercial operation gets so large that they control an industry. And that's kind of the story of the oil and gas industry. So, you know, some of us were chatting about the election before the event started, and we were saying that, well, you know, people are getting their information from Fox News, right, about a lot of issues. And this is a representation of the interlocking boards of directors for a lot of the industries involved with oil and gas. And this is really true with all industries. There are interlocking boards of directors so that these very dominant industries have a stake in everybody else's business. And I think one of the most dramatic ones, you know, we may not be too surprised that the electric utilities are in bed with the oil and gas industry, or even that finance is in bed with them. But let's think about what's happened to the media. Since 1984, when the consolidation of the media began, in 84 we had 50 large media companies. Today we have 6. And that is a big problem with where we are today. And one worth thinking about, and how we're going to get the issues out, and why it's so important that we have podcasts and all of the social media and all of the different ways that we can reach people. So I'm going to kind of start in the beginning and whiz through this history. You'll get a taste for it. So many of us learned about John D. Rockefeller in our high school history classes. We probably weren't paying a whole lot of attention. But he'd rolled up the oil industry by 1890, controlled 90% of it. Oil was important in those days. Everybody needed it because it was purified into kerosene, and that was people's lighting. So if you wanted to light your house, you had to be able to buy kerosene at a reasonable price. And Rockefeller had run all of his competitors out of business, and charged very high prices, and people were mad. This is the humor magazine Puck in 1904, and they were making fun of the Standard Oil Trust empire that belonged to Rockefeller. You can see the tentacles are around the U.S. Capitol and a state capitol. I actually think that's the California state capitol. So there was a lot of muckraking and a lot of pressure on Teddy Roosevelt's administration to do something about Standard Oil Trust. So we also learned in history class that Roosevelt sued the Standard Oil Trust, and then it was broken up, and that's about the end of the story we heard in that week of history class in high school. But the details are very important about that, because Standard Oil was allowed to write its own plan. So J.D. Rockefeller maintained an interest in all of the baby standards. Originally there were 30 of them. And the other directors of Standard met J.D. for lunch every day in Manhattan. And within a year, Rockefeller's profits had gone up 20%. And it's important to realize that Exxon, and from here on out, all of these companies have gone through all sorts of mergers and acquisitions and lots of names, calling them their modern names. So Standard of New Jersey got half of the original Standard's value, and that was the company that became Exxon. Standard of New York was Mobil. Some of you are old enough to remember Mobil that merged with Exxon in the 90s under the Clinton administration. And then Standard of California, Chevron. These are just a few of the baby standards, the largest ones, and the other babies either went out of business or were absorbed by these 7 companies. Now, it's important to know about the 7 sisters, because Gulf, Texaco, BP, and Shell were companies that also began around the turn of the 20th century, rather. So they all got into business. They each have villains like J.D. Rockefeller, lots of interesting stories. We don't have time to get into that. But these are the 7 companies that had all aspects of producing oil and gas. So they drilled for it, they transported it, they had tankers, they had a way to distribute it, they had refineries, they had gas stations. There are a lot of other oil companies, and of course there are other fracking companies today, but these are the majors, the most powerful companies. They were called the 7 Sisters. If you know anything about Greek mythology, Atlas had 7 daughters. They fought viciously, hated each other, but when one of them was attacked, they all came around and protected her. And that is the story of the 7 sisters. So this is just, I know this is too small to see here, but it just gives you a sense of some of the mergers and acquisitions that took place to make these companies the 4 majors today: Shell, Exxon, BP, and your lovely California oil company, Chevron. So the 7 sisters have had a lot of impacts, but I want to spend a few minutes on the impacts they've had on foreign policy, because a lot of decisions were made a long time ago that still reverberate today. So it was during World War I, Britain and France realized that they were going to beat the Ottoman Empire and that it would be broken up, and they wanted to have spheres of influence. So they got together and redrew the map and called it the Middle East, redrew the lines, created these countries, and then decided who would be most influential in these countries. So that's a little bit of the background about how the oil companies got into this, because it wasn't too long until the U.S. got in on that deal too, since the U.S. came in and was very involved in winning World War I. So in 1928, when oil was discovered in Iraq, the big majors, the Seven Sisters, got together and had one of their secret meetings. And this has all been verified, come out in federal testimony, been written about, but it just never gets on the front page of the mainstream media. One of the decisions they made, because they didn't trust one another, is that overproduction had been such a problem. Just like we have overproduction today, right? That's the history of the oil and gas industry. Boom, bust, boom, bust. So they wanted to try to prevent the bust of prices. So they decided that they would always work together when they went in and had a concession with one of these foreign nations, so they could watch one another, basically. The other thing that was really remarkable to me, and I read several books about this, is it's pretty well understood that the State Department let the oil industry, the U.S. oil industry, run one aspect of federal foreign policy in the Middle East. Now, shortly after that secret meeting, there was another secret meeting. This is in 1928. And these are the heads of the three largest of the international major oil companies, the Seven Sisters. So we're talking about today Exxon, Shell, and BP. They met at a castle in Scotland to come up with an agreement for how they were going to operate in the future to fix prices, to stop overproduction, and how they were going to relate with the other oil and gas independent companies. And they did this, and they met several times up until World War II. After that, they had slicker ways of doing this, and they eventually brought some of the other oil and gas companies into what was actually a written agreement about fixing prices and making themselves even more powerful, because the independents had to deal with them to sell their product. So pretty interesting history. Okay, so we've been talking about the oil and gas industry, and I want to just shift a minute, because if you're talking about natural gas, the history of electric and gas utilities is also very important, especially if you care about what's happened at Porter Ranch, about fracking, and how powerful companies, whether it's Sempra or Edison International, how did they get to be so powerful and really merge their interests with oil and gas? So this was Samuel Insull. He worked with Thomas Edison in creating the modern electric system. He was also kind of a shyster. He actually ended up with an empire of gas and electric companies, about 5,000 around the country. And he wasn't happy with having that empire and kind of ripping off consumers because there was a lot of anger about natural gas in particular and electricity being very expensive in the locations that had it. So he also established a bunch of investment companies. So the investment companies sold shares of the 5,000 utilities, watering it down. This led, in part, this kind of behavior, it was more widespread. I'm picking on Insull and his Commonwealth Edison. That is kind of the what it turned into. Anyway, he was ruined after the stock market crash in 1929. By 32, his empire had crashed. The 5,000 utilities had failed. So, people for a while didn't have energy services. And 600,000 investors lost their shirt. Sounds kind of familiar, right? Haven't we deregulated and allowed a lot of this similar behavior to happen recently? So we know Roosevelt came into office. There were a lot of reforms that needed to be made, including reforming the financial services industry, regulating it. But one of the industries that he decided to regulate was the electric industry and the gas industry. So we don't have time to get into all these battles, but they're fascinating. This Public Utility Holding Company Act ended up only being focused on electric companies. It was the most controversial bill before World War II. It took there were 600 lobbyists in Washington. It was a 200-day debate over the behavior of the electric industry. They knocked the gas industry out of it. And the holding company was a structure very similar to the trust that J.D. Rockefeller had, and very similar, now we call them multinational corporations, right? So it was a way to try to deal with the what had become very large electric companies. It regulated them, said they couldn't get too big, a lot of different things that the electric industry had to do. They couldn't gamble with ratepayer money. They were supposed to focus on providing electric service. The electric industry was not happy. They began red baiting almost immediately about this. But the advocates to really stop the natural gas industry from its misbehavior did not give up. These were a lot of municipal officials from around the country whose consumers were being ripped off by gas. So in 1938, they were able to pass the Natural Gas Act. This is important for what's happened today. The Natural Gas Act regulated pipelines. There was a process for building pipelines, and it regulated the price of gas. So this regulatory body, the Federal Power Commission, had the ability to use what it cost to produce the gas and a fair profit to come up with the price. The oil and gas industry were furious. So I'm going to kind of skip World War II because there's a lot to talk about and we don't have that much time, but I will just say that a lot of the technologies that are used today were developed beginning in World War II, and the industry really was able to benefit from the welding technologies, buying pipelines that the government or the taxpayer money had financed, and a lot of other benefits. But after the war, the fights that were going on before the war kind of took off again, because during World War II, everybody was kind of focused on winning the war, and there was a lot of corporate misbehavior, but there wasn't a lot of advocacy around it because it was all the pressure was, let's win the war. That kind of sounds familiar too, right? So I want to talk about this guy who is another crook that was elected to Congress. This is Senator Robert Kerr. He was elected in 1948, and he'd been the governor of Oklahoma, the oil state. He owned Kerr-McGee, which was a big oil company and later a uranium company that had a lot of bad behavior that we don't have time to go into either. But his entire 15 years in Congress, he died of a heart attack in office, were focused on protecting the oil and gas industry getting as many subsidies, helping it develop its power as much as possible. There were a number of these legislators. I'm kind of picking on him because I think he is one of the worst. He was involved, for instance, in getting the golden gimmick for the Seven Sisters who drill in Saudi Arabia, and this actually still exists today. If the giant oil companies that are in Saudi Arabia get a special tax break, I have the story in Frackopoly, and it's kind of outrageous. Also, the benefits around reserves, the oil depletion tax break that the oil and gas industry still gets today, that was Kerr. And interestingly enough, his great-nephew was the late Aubrey McClendon, for those of you who follow this carefully, of Chesapeake, who died under very mysterious circumstances the day after he was indicted by the Department of Justice. I figure that he was about to name names, although, there's no real investigation, just a lot of chatter on the internet. But anyway, there were a whole group of policymakers who were helping to funnel money to the oil and gas industry. Now, the other thing that was happening is that the Seven Sisters were either focused on getting exempted from the laws focused on monopoly power, which still existed during this period, or they were having conspiracies to get around them because they really wanted to be able to get bigger. They wanted to be able to work together to fix prices. They wanted to be able to really focus federal policy on the things that they needed. So John J. McCloy is, boy, what a piece of work. I read a 1,000-page biography about him. I will not go into all of the horrible things he did, but I will say he helped run the War Department and was one of the people responsible for the internment of the Japanese and for not doing something about Nazi death camps. And that was just the beginning of his really bad behavior. And he worked for 9 presidents in some capacity. He was part of that layer of government that exists kind of under the radar screen. The consultants, the diplomats, the advisors, and he played a number of different roles, but he finally died under the Reagan administration. But one of his top jobs was representing the Seven Sisters in their fights with the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission, and when they wanted to oppose one of the oil-producing countries, and they wanted to get together and write an agreement about how they were going to try to take control of the situation in the Middle East. And, a lot of this anger ended up happening because the big major oil companies never paid fairly for the resources from the beginning. About 10% of the profits that the big majors made on average. So there's a lot of anger, and it continued to grow through the decades. So anyway, McCloy went during the Kennedy administration, actually, and approached Kennedy on behalf of the Seven Sisters to get permission to break the antitrust laws. He got permission, and it wasn't necessary under the Kennedy administration to do what they wanted to do. But for the next several presidents, through John Mitchell of Reagan, the Reagan administration, they had permission to work together to kind of fix prices and to actually not deal fairly with the nations in the Middle East. But that's just part of the story. So I'm going to skip up to Richard Nixon now, because Nixon was very close to the oil and gas industry, even though they didn't get everything they wanted from him. But he, for instance, allowed a lot of the offshore drilling that went on to happen then for decades. He also, for his re-election, had accepted suitcases of money from different industries. And I documented some money, $700,000 that he got in a suitcase from an executive from Pennzoil for his re-election committee. He got about $20 million, a lot of it in cash, to be re-elected. And he did a lot of things that were really favorable to the oil and gas industry. Now, I want to have a little diverge a little bit. I want to talk about one of his appointees, because I think what Lewis Powell did has had such an effect on our nation today. So many of you may know about this already, but Lewis Powell was a corporate attorney in Richmond, Virginia, and he was very active in the Chamber of Commerce. And he and a number of very right-leaning, politically involved people were very upset about what was going on in the 1960s. They were mad about the Warren Court, for instance. They were angry that the Warren Court was extending rights to classes of people who had had no rights before. They were mad about the protests about Vietnam. They thought society was deteriorating. They were mad that Walter Cronkite at CBS and other commentators were giving press to the civil rights movement, to the anti-war movement. They were mad that ministers were getting involved in these issues, and they wanted to take back the country from liberal values. And, you know, I think that this is a real marker in what's happened to our nation. He wrote a several-page memo. You know, if you haven't read it, read it. It's instructive. It's you can find it several places on the internet, either under Powell Manifesto or Powell Memo, and you can read it in its entirety. But what he actually did was he laid out a plan for how to take back the country. And he said that it would lie in, strength lies in organization. He talked about it being long range and how they had to take back universities, all of the most important institutions in the country, including the media. And not only did he come up with this very strategic plan, although evil, he then went out and helped raise the money to do it. So the Koch family, a lot of these people had already tried to elect Goldwater in 1964, but the Scaife-Mellon family, Gulf Oil money, Coors family, so a lot of these very right-wing families that had big foundations. And over the next several decades, they were able to create more than 100 right-wing public interest institutes, many of them masquerading as if they're objective. I mean, we know the most, the ones that get quoted the most, the Heritage Foundation, Cato. Anyway, I think it had a real impact, and the oil industry was really involved in this as well. And it's also interesting, Powell, when he was on the Supreme Court, he wrote the first decision giving corporations political speech. So kind of put into motion Citizens United, etc. And what's really sad is he's considered a liberal justice today. I mean, please. So the Democrats also started getting corporate money in the later 1970s and the 1980s, more than they had in the past, and unfortunately have always been cheaper to buy, right? But this is Jimmy Carter signing a bill to create the Department of Energy. And if you follow drilling and fracking, you know that the Department of Energy plays a big role. Many of us who are old enough remember that the Department of Energy was supposed to do a lot of research on alternative energy. They did some. They also promoted kind of an all of the above strategy, especially coal. But at the same time, a couple years later, the deregulation of the natural gas industry also occurred. Now, from the time that I was talking about under the Roosevelt administration, oil and gas and the utilities had been fighting to get rid of these rules that were passed in the 1930s. Really fighting, like red baiting the commissioners at the Federal Power Commission. Anybody who spoke in favor of these things, I mean, in the 1950s, they were really tormented. It took them all those decades to build the political power to actually pass the legislation under the Carter administration. But at the same time, Jimmy Carter had created the Department of Energy, which eliminated the Federal Power Commission and created a new agency called the Federal Power Regulatory Commission. So the agency that we have to deal with today for power lines, infrastructure, and a lot of the things that we're dealing with. And the other thing that happened is all of the different functions in the federal government related to energy were all brought together under the Department of Energy, and it was made a cabinet-level post. And a lot of the bad things that we are living from today really took place in that agency. You know, the devil is always in the details, right? So beginning in 1912, the oil and gas industry really spent a lot of effort on making sure that federal tax dollars were spent on all of the technologies that would help them really get a hold of the energy policy in the country. So, you know, if you followed fracking at all, you may have read one of these kind of nauseating books glorifying the wildcatters who began fracking and saying they were brilliant entrepreneurs. Well, a lot of the technologies that they credit these entrepreneurs with, actually, even the drilling that they did in the early period for fracking was paid for by DOE, and a lot of the technologies were developed by our taxpayer dollars. So the deregulation of natural gas is important for fracking and what's happened today. So when the Federal Power Commission was eliminated because it had regulated the price of gas and building of pipelines, it opened the floodgates for building more pipelines, and they have more than doubled between 84 and 2014, more than 900,000 miles of pipelines, and in fact thousands more miles of pipelines are under construction today. We don't even know how many, because in many states the gathering lines, some of the lines aren't even counted. This really brings us up to the Reagan era. And, you know, I think to understand monopoly power, we have to take a minute to talk about Ronald Reagan, because the economic interests that were concerned with becoming very large, having a lot of ability to be powerful multinationals, to reorient the U.S.'s trade policy for their benefit, to become really giant, including the oil industry, which was a big funder of Reagan. They developed Ronald Reagan into their candidate. And one of the agreements was that if he would be elected, that they would get rid of traditional antitrust law. And this man next to Reagan is Robert Bork, who is a right-wing scholar who came up with this idea that monopolies are good. They're good for consumers. And if the price isn't too high, if there's a consumer benefit, then we should just let the mergers and acquisitions happen. So they've greatly narrowed the definition of an antitrust violation. And actually, between World War II and when Reagan was elected, both political parties agreed that monopoly power was bad because small business couldn't compete. There was a recognition about the political power. But this has all been eliminated, and with this kind of right-wing ideology that for efficiency you need big companies, mergers are good, the marketplace is self-policing, all things that we have come to see are not true. And sadly, skipping ahead to the Clinton administration, a lot of what Bill Clinton did was actually modeled on the same things that the Reagan administration had been promoting. And a lot of the deregulation that we're suffering from today of the financial services industry, I mean the crash that we had in 2008, really goes back to getting rid of those protective rules that were passed in the 1930s. All of the so-called free trade bills or policies, and the big oil and gas mergers, and a lot of the media mergers really speeded up, sadly, under President Clinton, along with a lot of the other things that we're suffering from today. The policies, the social policies, like destroying our social welfare net. A lot of this goes back to the Clinton administration. And one of Clinton's allies was someone that those of you who are old enough, who were of age in the 1990s, might recognize. This is Ken Lay, who was eventually indicted and was going to go to jail, and then he mysteriously died of a heart attack, too. But Lay played a big part in deregulating the electric industry. He also played a big part here in California of high rates that you may be paying for today, because the deregulatory measures that he fought for actually almost ruined the electric utilities here. There were blackouts in the 1990s. And then the electric industry, Edison and PG&E, were bailed out by by consumers and allowed to get even bigger and bigger. But those changes to the electric industry, the deregulation, the creation of a wholesale market in electricity, some of that retail deregulation, it was really taking what should be considered a resource for people's use and further commodifying it so it could be sold, gambled on, futures contracts, all of those shenanigans that we see today. And the other thing that's really happened is a lot more energy is being generated today. So rather than conserving energy and moving in the right direction, so to prevent climate chaos, between 2003 and 2013, natural gas use went up 73% in the United States. It really unleashed natural gas. So Ken Lay played a very interesting role in this. He befriended some of the major environmental groups who also signed off on the deregulation, and he played a really negative role in that continues to reverberate today. So the Obama administration, I got ahead of myself. Yeah, that slide was out of place, sorry. So I want to move into the Bush administration, Bush II, because because a lot of what happened in the Energy Policy Act is affecting natural gas use today. You probably know about the Halliburton loophole, that the oil and gas industry are actually exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act. That's been the root cause of a lot of the water pollution. The other thing that's not as well known is that Public Utility Holding Company Act that I talked about that was passed in 1935 that prevented electric utilities from getting too big and a lot of their bad behavior, that was repealed. And so today we have about 20 giant utilities that control more than 50% of electric and in many cases gas. I mean, Sempra is a good example of a multinational corporation that could not have existed under the Public Utility Holding Company Act. It engages in every type of business through its subsidiaries. It has regulated businesses where and the regulated industry still gets consumers to pay for a lot of their mistakes. I mean, Edison is going to do that, right? Edison International's subsidiary, Southern California Edison, it's going to be bailed out probably for its mistakes at San Onofre. I mean, this is the kind of thing that's happened because of the repeal of PUCA, which many of us fought tooth and nail to protect for about 15 years. And then the other thing is that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, was given greatly expanded powers. It was given the power of eminent domain so that it can go in and condemn public land or the land that belongs to homeowners, anybody's land, to build pipelines, liquefied natural gas facilities, whatever the oil and gas industry desires. And it was given the power over one of our nation's most important environmental laws, the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires a environmental assessment of big projects. So it's like putting the fox in charge of the hen house. And FERC has almost never seen an electric power line, a pipeline, or gas infrastructure that it doesn't love. And then the Obama administration obviously has also favored the natural gas industry in so many ways. I think I'm beginning to go beyond my allotted time, so I'm just going to skip through this kind of quickly. But I do want to show that the Seven Sisters, that are now 4, are among the 10 largest frackers, and a lot of the rules that have benefited them and the other parts of the fracking industry they lobbied for and have really helped put us in this position. And so what we see here is really what we have to stop. These are a number of the places where there are shale plays or pipelines that make it attractive to build new gas-fired plants. And there are plans for much more natural gas-fired capacity. And this is really the battle that we're in. Stop fracking, stop the storage facilities, the new ones, try to close down the old ones, and all towards keeping fossil fuels in the ground. And obviously we have a big movement. It's a diverse movement. It's all around the country. A very dedicated movement to really try to turn our energy policy around. And just to show you a few of these pictures. I mean, I just find it I really love how young people, too, are getting involved in all of these battles and how involved young people have been in this election season, because we need all kinds of diversity, including more young people involved. And it's really about climate and the future, right? And we want a life for our children and grandchildren. So there is going to be a big march for a clean energy future that about 600 organizations are sponsoring. We have some folks here who will be attending, and we're very excited because we are going to declare our independence from fossil fuels in Philadelphia. And we're going to continue to put pressure on both parties to do the right thing about energy. And no matter who wins in November, we have a lot of work ahead of us. So I'm going to end now and ask Sandy and Matt, who are really wonderful local activists working on different aspects of this battle over our energy future. They're going to come up and say a few words. They'll take questions. I can take questions. But let me have you come on up.
Sit or stand? Just gonna disperse really quick.
Just don't ask me any questions about her book. I haven't quite read it yet. You should ask her.
Yeah, okay.
Oh yeah, my name is Matt Pacuco. I'm the president and co-founder of a group called Save Porter Ranch. We were formed April 2014 when we found out that they're going to be doing fracking, or they were fracking right behind Porter Ranch. I mean, we moved there for the beautiful hills and the sunshine and the clean air, and then found out that that's not really what was going on. And that was thanks to a Food and Water Watch came down to, fight the frackers at a presentation at a neighborhood council meeting, and then I'd known a long time before that fracking was bad, and I'd done my dabbling in fighting it, but then when I found out it's in my backyard, it was, okay, we have to start this and let the community know what's going on that nobody even knew about, as it turns out. We went door to door and found out people were going, oil wells, what? Yeah, they're right behind the hill there where you can't see them. Everything's right behind the first hill, out of sight. Besides the oil drilling, we found out about the whole SoCal gas facility, the biggest underground gas storage facility in the western United States. Nobody knew. So we organized the neighbors, educated a lot of people, had a lot of meetings to tell people about fracking at first. And as we grew and learned more, we found out that the gas facility was probably even more of a danger. And so we set up, to do our own air monitoring and our own health study door to door. And that was set to launch on October 25th last year. And October 23rd, SoCal Gas did a real big advertisement for what we were doing by having their blowout. So we went, from a little local organization to kind of a front-page organization overnight. But we were ready. We hit the ground running. We were already organized, and it just got bigger, and we were able to get the word out there even more to counter the crap that comes out of the industry and out of SoCal Gas. Is like everything they said was a lie from day one, where they said they didn't even have a leak, and it just got worse from there. So we're up against a pretty evil empire. That whole industry, they just man. The more I find how evil they are, the worse it gets. It's after hearing what Wenonah just said about how tough this enemy is. I was kind of like depressed, thinking, oh well, how do we fight this? But no, we fight this by exactly what's going on here, and keep organizing more people and informing more people, and it will just grow the same way as they grew. They grew from nothing back in, someone discovered oil, and people, we don't need that, we have horses, So it's the same thing it's just in a new era. So we're going to continue on and get bigger and better and badder, and eventually we're going to shut it all down.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Sandy Navarro. I'm a community resident in South Los Angeles. I'm also a community organizer for a nonprofit called Esperanza Community Housing. And thank you. And I got involved in this issue. I was born and raised in South Los Angeles, and I never knew oil drilling was happening in our neighborhood. I went to elementary school right next door, and it wasn't until I went to college, that Mountain Mary's College, which is literally divided by a wall between this drilling site and the campus. And so I got involved through Esperanza. We started hearing in around 2010 that our residents were, complaining of odors and that their children were waking up with pillows soaked in blood. And so we thought, hey, something's going on here. And so we found out there's a drilling site right across from one of our affordable housing buildings. And so that was a huge issue, especially because housing in LA is, it's scarce, right? And so it's a huge issue. And so we started organizing our tenants, our community. We started documenting the odors. We started, making phone calls to the agencies that are supposed to regulate the air and that are supposed to respond, right? And so the lack of response pushed us to, start conducting our own health surveys, trying to document what the symptoms. And so we found out that, we had a reporter from the LA Times come out and interview some of our residents. And, of course, a photographer came out, this little boy who had nosebleeds all the time, just started having a nosebleed. And she caught the picture, and I think that's really what, impacted so many people, led Senator Barbara Boxer to come out and ask this facility, which is operating on land owned by the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. So, and that's just one of the drilling sites, right? And so, the church that it's supposed to preach and that is preaching about doing the right thing is not responding and has never responded to our phone calls. We've had our community also write a letter and make a video pleading that they shut this facility down, and they've never responded. So we continue to organize. We also found out that we weren't the only community impacted by this. We found that there's another drilling site a few blocks down. And then a third drilling site that's also owned by the Archdiocese. And so we formed the STAND Coalition, which is Stand Together Against Neighborhood Drilling. And it's really a bunch of organizations and allies, Porter Ranch as well, who are coming together to try to leverage our resources, because this issue is just impacting us. It's happening literally feet away from our homes, and nobody's willing to step up to the plate and address this issue. And so I find it beautiful that our communities, that all of us are coming together, to just move away from this antiquated practice, right? And really push, the people that are supposed to regulate these agencies to, do their job. And really, we're trying to end neighborhood drilling. We're trying to end all type of drilling. That's our mission. And so, that's what I do right now. We're trying to work with universities as well to try to collect some of the health data, because, really the data is not there, especially in urban communities like South Los Angeles. So we're really, trying to make a difference and and hold people accountable. And so that's really what I do in South Los Angeles. That's me, Sandy Navarro. Thank you.
Okay, we can take questions now from Matt or Sandy or me. We'll start here.
So I was wondering if you could share a little bit with the audience here, since not everyone is familiar with the history and background of Food and Water Watch, what some of the work that Food and Water Watch has done here in Southern California, going back to the Cadiz project and all the way through today.
Well, I'll start it, and then maybe I'll ask one of our staff to stand up. I mean, Food and Water Watch is going on 11 years now. I worked for one of the Ralph Nader groups, public citizen for almost a decade. And, Ralph at one time could go in with Nader's Raiders, march into Congress, find some allies, get a lot of things done. Well, those days are very long past, and it just became apparent that the only way we're going to change anything is through grassroots action and amplifying the voices of people who are in the trenches and really bringing some accountability. And so that's kind of where we have put our resources. And I'll just say that one of our bread and butter issues has been to stop water privatization. Municipal water privatizations, these terrible tunnels, a lot. We've been doing this for really starting at Public Citizen. And I think it's actually one of the success stories of grassroots organizing is how many communities around this country have stopped private water companies from coming in. And of course, they are also very excited, these private water companies, about fracking and wastewater. They want to recycle it here and poison people with it. It's all about profiteering. So, do you want to say something?
Sure.
I mean, that's probably people
Hey everyone, I'm Alex. I'm one of the organizers down here in Los Angeles. Good to see you. Yeah, and I recognize people from all over LA County who we're working with, fighting in the trenches with. So give yourselves a round of applause. Cool. And so some of the work we've been doing down here has just been on the oil and gas issues. Originally, we worked on a campaign to stop fracking in California, and we realized it's a much bigger issue than that. We need to keep it in the ground. And so we're working in Carson. I see people from Carson here. Give them a round of applause. We're continuing to fight the fight there, where they've had proposals for drilling and defeated those and fracking bans and continued to push that forward. And then, of course, we're working in Porter Ranch on food issues. So, yeah, I'm going to sit down now. Please ask Wenonah a question.
Yeah. I think if we keep it in the ground, doesn't that mean we all have to get out of our cars? And I don't ever hear that said.
Well, we're going to need to have different transportation options, right? I mean, we have to reform our electric system if we're going to have electric cars, because that's what's really being put forward as the solution. But, yeah.
We don't go there fast.
Okay, here.
Thanks for coming. I read that the Obama administration approved offshore fracking. I didn't know that was a thing. Is that happening?
Yeah, off the. Sorry.
Through that, and the gallons of water used, are they releasing it back to the ocean? And sorry, I have had this question before. And the numbers. What's that compared to the numbers in conventional drilling when they drill offshore? With water?
Well, we don't know a whole lot about fracking offshore now. We do know it's been taking place probably around the world, because I saw when I was writing Frackopoly ads for people with expertise for fracking. So it is being allowed now off the coast of California. Yes, it appears that they will be using chemicals and large amounts of water, and we're doing research now to see exactly what those impacts are going to be, but we can imagine that they're going to be similar to on land.
And I'm sorry, what is that compared to the gallon of water you use?
I don't know yet. We're really doing research. It's like when fracking first started. We didn't know a lot of the facts. So it is new that they're admitting it. So now we have to try to look at their literature and figure it out. It just happened about a month ago. Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious about the motivation to write your book, because I know you do so much with organizing and with research, and I'm wondering, what are your hopes that Frackopoly will do? Is it like to help inspire the movement? Is it to help create more eco-literacy? What was the intent?
Well, I talked about this a little in the beginning, but I'll say one of the major intentions was to show that it's deregulation, and that the only way we're really going to be able to jumpstart renewables and energy efficiency is organizing for public policy, not depending on the market. The idea that the market is going to bring us renewables, we would all be using renewable energy if that were the case. So it's really making a case that it's only by organizing to hold our elected officials accountable to make them do these things that we're going to do it. We need to stop as environmentalists saying, oh, the market's going to do it. Yes, the price is coming down, but we generated 5.5% of our electricity from wind, solar, and geothermal, real renewable resources. If you count geothermal in there, it's only a small percentage. And we really need to do better than that. And we need to know how the deregulation brought us here. It didn't just happen. Yes?
So the citizens' climate lobby, carbon fee and dividend does not ring for you.
We're not real excited about the carbon tax, and I'll tell you why. First of all, rather than coming up with financial schemes like cap and trade, carbon taxes, why don't we just tell them not to do it? People understand that. People understand. So we're looking at the carbon tax because when you look at who wants it, Exxon has spoken in favor of a carbon tax, saying that as long as it's revenue neutral, they support it. So we started looking at the data, because the only way you can have this argument with other environmental groups who are so enthusiastic about this is looking at the data. And we're going to be soon releasing the briefing paper, but you'll see that British Columbia is being used as the example, that carbon emissions were reduced. So we looked at their numbers. Well, it turns out the numbers they're using are for the years that were the recession, not more recently. So yes, there was less carbon, but we'll see what happens in the future. And, I'm worried that that's the best we can do, because I don't believe you can go out and organize people to tax themselves. I think it's going to be another thing that the right wing uses against us. And I remember when Clinton was in office, and I worked for I think it was the Union of Concerned Scientists then, and we were supposed to organize and advocate for the carbon tax. Did not fly. So let's ask for what we want, which is to keep it in the ground, to have a Marshall Plan, to have a big plan with resources that go into it to figure out how we're going to do this. Surely this is as big a crisis as World War II, that our climate is about to go under.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that. If one of the biggest for-profit companies on the planet says that, hey, we like that, that's because it's good for their profits. So it's a suspect right there.
Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to do this orderly. I think you were next, and then you were next. And then we'll get back there.
Since you were talking about the trade agreements and you got very close to it and you were with Public Citizen, do you want to let this group know about investor-to-state dispute settlement?
Well,
and that could have prevented, in hindsight, obviously, it could have prevented the crash of 29.
Right. Well, I mean, when you let investors, NAFTA has investor dispute provision that will be in the TPP. And this is something that allows companies, corporations, to sue local, state, and the federal government if one of those governments takes protective action for their citizens. So it goes across many, many issues. And it would also, the TPP would allow a lot more export of liquefied natural gas. It would just basically, any country that was a party to it would just automatically get an expedited liquefied natural gas exports. And under the investor dispute clause, it means that if some locality has banned fracking, let's say New York State, that a foreign company can sue New York State for loss of profits. That's what trade agreements are. They're not about trade and tariffs. They're about multinational power, multinational corporate power. Yes. Yeah, why don't we give somebody else a chance? Yeah. Yes. Good.
How the leak stop? And also, how safe are you living there?
Well, the blowout was supposedly stopped, a few months back. But even after then, up till this very day, a lot of people are still getting sick from something that's going on coming off of that hill. And that's pretty well documented. And there have been so many other problems found with all those wells up there since now the microscope is on that facility. It's basically full of holes. It's aging. It's been leaking, and most of their wells, I don't remember the exact number, most of them could not pass some basic integrity tests and had to be taken offline. Even more than that. But taken offline, but other ones have not passed the basic. It's just like a huge number. Initially, it was like 60 or 80%. And that's what we've been breathing all this time, is all that stuff been leaking. So now, no, we're not safe, and then because people are still getting sick to this very day, there's a huge problem with that place.
Okay, the gentleman back here who's had his hand up.
Thanks. I want to know what your sense of urgency is. I heard you say at the beginning of the talk that maybe 10 or 15 more years of natural gas. We're already at 1.5. We're already over 400 parts per billion. Bill McKibben says if we want to stay below 1.5, we need to stop burning carbon in the next 4 years.
That's my urgency. But methane in the shorter period is a much more potent greenhouse gas. I mean, we have to get off fossil fuels or we're going to have a major calamity. We're going to go beyond the tipping point, and it's going to devastate a lot of lives around the world.
What's your level of optimism on our doing it in time?
My level of optimism is nothing has happened until it's happened. We're going to fight like hell, right? And go out and save our communities and the planet. And we're not going to let these politicians let their political aspirations ruin the planet. And we're building a movement, so I'm optimistic. I am having trouble getting to all these. I'm going to go this way, okay, so I don't miss people. You would.
But to piggyback on that comment, because I agree entirely with where you're going, the climate movement has got to ramp up the rhetoric and start calling this a crisis, an emergency, a catastrophe, and thinking. We do not have time left for incrementalism that everyone's able to take as possible.
Absolutely right. I mean, that's one of the reasons we formed Food and Water Watch. We know we have to push our own allies.
About the messaging and the rhetoric.
Yeah.
My sense is it just isn't strong enough.
You know, a lot, yeah.
People keep talking about, we have this much time, it's okay. It's not.
I totally agree.
And until someone starts calling it an emergency and demands that our political leaders treat it as an emergency, things such as Obama should be giving a major climate emergency. We should have a department. Obama should be telling people what they need to do to conserve, to transition, and just the rhetoric alone is just not bad.
Okay, let's move. Yes.
So can you speak a little to what's happening right now in Colorado with the push citizens basically calling for a ban on fracking, and you have politicians like Hillary Clinton who say, I support banning fracking where local support is there. You see a community pushing to ban fracking and the oil industry coming in and spending millions and millions.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about
There is a giant fight going on in Colorado. I was there just 10 days ago at our Food and Water Watch office. Communities there like Longmont passed bans on fracking. The governor of Colorado, Democratic Governor Hickenlooper, who comes out of the oil and gas industry and is a big supporter of fracking and the oil and gas interests in the state, sued basically allowed the Supreme Court to overrule the local bans. So the local bans are basically going to be gone. And so a number of organizations, local groups who'd fought for the bans, Food and Water Watch, now a number of national groups have come on too, including, I think, Greenpeace, and I think the Local 350 is on board, are out collecting names for two initiatives that would basically be more like a moratorium on fracking. One of them would create a 2,500-foot distance between wells and schools and houses that would basically close down the industry. Now the debate is whether they can collect enough names. They've now raised, I know we've been busy raising money for months to have pay people to go out and collect signatures. If it's on the ballot, it probably will be one of the most important environmental battles for the election in November. And you can go to our website or Google Food and Water Watch Colorado fracking initiatives. We have a lot of information on it.
Raising her hand for a while.
Oh, I can't see you. Sorry.
I was just curious if any of your organizations are involved in divestment movements at all to get those money.
I couldn't hear. We haven't been involved in divestment.
Do you think it's a valid way to get folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it's organizing on university campuses. Yes, I think there's a lot of organizations that are involved. I mean, one of the reasons we haven't gotten involved in it is we fight a lot of corporations. We have a food program, we have a water program, and a lot of the divestment options are other corporations we fight. So, I mean, honestly, it's kind of messy for us because there are a lot of bad corporations that are being considered clean investments, especially in the water area. Yeah, including Nestle. Okay, we're coming around. Yes.
This is a question for Sandy. Thank you for what you're doing. And can you speak to organizing communities that are having a rough time working more than one job just to afford their bus pass? And what you had to go through. And the LA Archdiocese, I had known about this, but I heard some gasps when you'd start talking about how the LA Catholic Archdiocese owns a lot of oil fields and a lot of oil property. Can you speak to how you organize?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a challenge for us because University Park is it's a diverse community. You have longtime residents who are predominantly Spanish speaking, so there's a language barrier whenever information comes in. And then you have the student population who's very transient, so they kind of don't really hear about the issue and they're not really invested. And so it's hard, to get people invested in. And so, what we do with Esperanza is that we have a model called community health promoters. And so we really try to educate every year a class of community health promoters. And we try to use that program to start, mobilizing residents where we identify the issue, we document the issue, and most of all, we empower residents to speak up, to put pressure. And so for us, it was surprising that our campaign, which is called People Not Pozos, meaning people not oil wells, got so far, because for us, our focus was a lot like the health impact. And the environment, the outdoor air quality. And so, for us, to have a community that's predominantly Spanish speaking and to get that far, I think was empowering for them. And so the fact that the city attorney is now focused on this drilling site, and that recently there was an injunction placed on Alenco that would require a lot of monitoring, 24-hour monitoring for the next 4 years, which is still not enough, because we were not about regulating so much, because accidents happen. We also know that these facilities tend to lie to the agencies or the fire department. There's records of them lying, and so that's not enough. So for us, it's just really ending neighborhood drilling, all type of drilling, and but overall, the organizing is really what has gotten our campaign, so far. And so we're really proud. I'm really proud to have the people that are impacted leading the way. Thank you.
Yes.
My group, the Convergence Transaction Network, is launching a campaign that asks for the democratization of energy from one end to the other, that it should be in the hands of the people, not for profit. What do you think of that approach? It's been raised in other places around the country as well.
I think it's a great idea. We know even today that public power, public water provide better services and cheaper services than corporate.
But I'm talking about from extraction.
No, I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. I think it's a long process, but I think, of course, energy should be local as possible. It can't always be local. And really, we have to get away from extractive industries anyway. Extractive industries are the whole problem that we're dealing with. We really need to use a lot less energy. Figure plastic. About 76% of natural gas today is for plastic. Plastic for food wrapping. We got to change that. We have to change our economic system. This is part of a much bigger problem. So I think we have room maybe for. We have a lot more questions, and we're really running out of time. So maybe we could.
He's been waiting a while.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because I'm saying maybe some of you can come, and the person that you have a question for afterwards. I don't know how. Are we okay on time? Can we keep going? I know we had an agreement for.
About 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 more minutes. So if you've asked a question already, don't put your hand up. Come on. So we have somebody who's way over here who's had his hand up a long time.
I was going to kind of piggyback on what he was saying. I don't know if people are familiar with Guy McPherson. And he's saying that, he passed the tipping point, but he's on the fringe, but he provides a lot of evidence. But nonetheless, we should still fight for social justice and clean energy regardless, even if we pass that tipping point. But I think it's important that what Food and Water Watch does, and she does with her book, she brings in what the banks, the intersection of power, and what's happening. And large environmental groups have been complicit in a lot of this stuff. And even though they've done great work in many respects, you've got big environmental groups allowing for deregulation, EDF and NRDC, in the late 90s in our power industry, or Sierra Club getting gas money, or the PERG running Hillary Clinton's campaign, the old Nader group. These things need to be pointed out, and they're important. But not to say that these groups don't do good work, but it's what Food and Water Watch does is really getting down to the core of the grassroots and what the truth is about what's going on overall, like bringing in all dynamics and saying this is what's happening, and how our system is so corrupt, and we need people on a grassroots level to really affect change. So it's not really a question, but.
Okay. Thank you for the compliment. Yes.
On your chart of the intertwining of all of these forces, you did have nonprofits up there. Could you just speak a little bit to that?
Well, I think the only traditional nonprofit was the Nature Conservancy, which actually owns fracking sites. A lot of the nonprofits that were listed up there were trade associations. So things like the Foreign Policy Association, nonprofits that are actually speaking for industry and often represent industry in the media. I write a chapter about Environmental Defense Fund, for instance. I don't consider Environmental Defense Fund an environmental group. They've now spent, they have some good staff there, but you can't, for years, decades, run interference for corporations and really be an environmental group. So I would put them in a league that's a little bit different than some of the other big groups that may have been too close to industry. And I'll just say that a lot of it is the big funders. It's the Energy Foundation up in the Presidio, really, that's funded a lot of the energy work over the last several decades, including deregulation, now making fracking safer. So, that's part of what we're up against, but we have to try to all work in the same direction, and I really do think it's the grassroots that's going to take us over the edge. And I just don't think it's useful to be defeatist. You know what I mean? I know we're in a tough place, but what we have to do is build the power and the excitement and get lots of young people involved and be in the streets, and we hopefully can stop the worst of this. So maybe one more question, and maybe somebody has a question for these other folks who haven't had as much of an opportunity to talk as they should deserve. Or maybe you want to just make a statement at the end. Maybe that's better. Why don't you both say something, and then we can have conversation, and we'll sign books. If you have a book, I'll sign it. I'm sure both of these folks would sign it.
I didn't bring my book.
I mean, you sign other people's books.
Did they ever think about sending a petition to the Pope?
So we actually did send a letter, and we also created a video for the Pope, which you can find on our website and on YouTube. And we haven't had a response. We had the community read the letter, and we filmed it and sent it over, and we have not received a response.
We should all write to him.
So, but I would be glad to share with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I want to comment on what the gentleman said about the messaging and how this is really a crisis. What I've noticed when we got Save Porter Ranch organized, we found out that we had a crisis right behind the first hill behind our house. But most people, if they look around their lives and they look around Porter Ranch, they see it's beautiful, and I can go to work, and the breeze is nice, and they don't. If we came out and said emergency crisis, oh my God, we're all going to die, we wouldn't have been listened to. So, and a lot of the world, people, their life goes on. They don't see these problems. They don't know about them. They go to work. They got their job. They go home. We don't want to come out sounding like extremists, crying, fire in the movie theater or whatever. You got to kind of ease them into the conversation. Once people wake up and see what's going on, then you got some traction with them. But in my experience, you got to, what worked for us was showing how some very small things directly affect their life every day, and that's how we got their attention. So, and I want to, and also, this other woman asked about, we expect everyone to just, park our cars and start walking. No, it's going to be a long process. The world is entrenched in fossil fuels right now, and we're not saying, hey, get out of your car and start walking. It's going to be a long process. It's going to take a lot of education, and it's going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight, but it has to be done. And again, we're not doing some sort of extremist thing where everyone's life has to change tomorrow to save the world. That's maybe that is the case, but we can't present it that way, or people just won't buy it.
Thank you.
So I guess I just want to say thank you for the invitation, first of all, to Food and Water Watch, and thank you to you all for coming out here and for caring about this issue and for, listening. I think I just want to say, I encourage you all to, also, keep getting involved. I think the youth voice is also something that's been missing in this movement, and, we've been trying to mobilize the youth in our community as well. So if you have young folks that want to get involved, tell them to, and then, find allies. And overall, I think also, when we think about this transition, we also have to think about communities like South Los Angeles. How do they afford, this transition? Overall, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. And we hope to see you soon.